What if I told you that anger is just a choice you keep making? Every single day. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A colleague takes credit for your work. Your partner says something that stings. A stranger is rude to you for no reason. And every single time, you feel that familiar heat rising in your chest. Your jaw clenches. Your fists tighten. Your mind races with what you should have said, what you could have done differently. But here's what most people don't realize. That anger isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose. And once you understand this simple truth, everything changes. He sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, so hard his knuckles turned white. Someone had just cut him off on the highway, nearly causing an accident. His heart pounded. His mind filled with rage. For the next 20 minutes, he replayed the incident over and over, imagining confrontations, cursing under his breath, letting that stranger who would never think about him again completely control his emotional state. This is how most people live. They hand over the remote control of their emotions to everyone around them. A rude cashier ruins their morning. A critical email destroys their afternoon. An inconsiderate driver wrecks their evening. They move through life as emotional pinballs, bouncing from one reaction to the next, never realizing they have a choice. But what if there was another way? What if you could develop an unshakable calm that nothing and no one could penetrate? What if you could train yourself to remain peaceful in the face of any provocation, any insult, any frustration? This isn't about suppressing your emotions or pretending you don't feel anything. This isn't about becoming a robot or letting people walk all over you. This is about something far more powerful: true emotional freedom. Over the next few hours, we're going to explore the psychology, neuroscience, and practical strategies that will transform how you respond to the world around you. You're going to learn why anger feels so automatic, why it's actually optional, and most importantly, how to break free from its grip forever. Because here's the truth. The person who can control their anger controls their life. The person who cannot be angered cannot be controlled. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly how to become that person. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of Anger. To master anger, you first need to understand what it actually is. She walked into her apartment after a long day at work. Her roommate had left dishes in the sink again, despite promising to clean up. In that instant, she felt anger surge through her body. But what exactly was happening in those few seconds between seeing the dishes and feeling the rage? Anger doesn't begin with the emotion. It begins with a thought. Here's how the process actually works. First, something happens in your environment. Your brain perceives this event. Then, almost instantaneously, your mind interprets what it means. It's this interpretation, this story you tell yourself about what happened, that triggers the emotional response we call anger. The dirty dishes don't make you angry. Your thought about the dirty dishes makes you angry. The rude comment doesn't make you angry. Your interpretation of that comment as disrespectful or insulting makes you angry. This distinction is absolutely critical, because it reveals something profound between the event and your emotion. There's a gap, a space, a moment where you have a choice. Most people never see this gap. The event and the emotion feel simultaneous, automatic, inevitable. Someone insults them, and they believe they have no choice but to feel angry. But that's an illusion created by the speed of your thoughts. Think about it this way. The exact same event can produce completely different emotional responses in different people. One person gets cut off in traffic and laughs it off. Another becomes enraged. Same event, different interpretation, different emotion. He remembered a story his grandfather once told him. Two men were walking through a forest when they encountered a snake on the path. The first man jumped back in terror. The second man stepped forward with fascination. Same snake, same situation, completely different responses. Why? Because the first man had been bitten by a snake as a child and interpreted snakes as dangerous threats. The second man was a biologist who studied snakes and interpreted them as fascinating creatures. Their past experiences, Beliefs and interpretations determine their emotional responses, not the snake itself. This is the first and most important truth about anger. It's not what happens to you that makes you angry. It's what you think about what happens to you. But understanding this intellectually isn't enough. Your brain has been practicing the anger response for years, maybe decades. It's become an automatic pattern, a well-worn neural pathway. Every time something frustrating happens, your brain travels down that familiar road so quickly you don't even notice you're on it. The neuroscience here is fascinating. When you perceive a threat or frustration, your amygdala, the ancient alarm system in your brain, activates. It triggers a cascade of stress hormones: adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking and emotional regulation, goes offline. This is the fight or flight response, and it evolved to protect you from physical dangers like predators. But here's the problem. Your brain can't distinguish between a lion attacking you and someone cutting you off in traffic. It responds the same way to both. She learned this the hard way. For years, she would explode at her children over minor misbehaviors: spilled milk, forgotten homework, messy room. Each incident triggered the same response. Her amygdala would fire, stress hormones would flood her system, and she would react with anger that was completely disproportionate to the situation. Later, she would feel guilty and confused. Why did she keep doing this? She loved her children. She didn't want to yell at them. But in those moments, it felt completely beyond her control. What she didn't understand was that she had trained her brain to respond this way. Every time she reacted with anger, she strengthened that neural pathway. Every time she let frustration turn into rage, she made it easier for her brain to travel that route again. But here's the good news. If you can train your brain to respond with anger, you can train it to respond with calm. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural pathways, means you're not stuck with your current patterns. You can create new ones. This is where the real work begins. Not in understanding anger intellectually, but in rewiring your automatic responses at the neural level. The first step is developing what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to observe your own thoughts. Instead of being swept away by the anger, you learn to notice it arising. You become the witness of your own mental processes. He started practicing this after years of anger destroying his relationships. The next time someone did something frustrating, instead of immediately reacting, he paused. He noticed the thought, "This person is disrespecting me." He noticed the sensation in his body, the heat rising, the tension building. And in that moment of noticing, something remarkable happened. The anger didn't disappear, but it lost its power over him. By observing it, he created distance from it. He was no longer the anger. He was the person observing the anger. And from that place observation, he had a choice. This is the fundamental shift that transforms your relationship with anger. Moving from being anger to witnessing anger. Moving from "I am angry" to "I notice I'm feeling angry." It sounds like a small distinction, but it changes everything, because once you can observe your anger, you can question it. You can examine the thought that created it. You can ask yourself, is this interpretation true? Is this the only way to see this situation? Is this anger serving me, or is it controlling me? Most anger is based on distorted thinking. Psychologists have identified several common cognitive distortions that fuel anger. Mind reading. Assuming you know why someone did something. He did that to disrespect me. She's trying to make me look bad. Personalization. Believing everything is about you. That driver cut me off to make me angry. My boss gave me this assignment because he doesn't value me. Catastrophizing. Blowing things out of proportion. This ruined my entire day. I can't believe this is happening to me. Should statements. Rigid rules about how the world should work. People should be more considerate. He shouldn't have said that. She should know better. Every one of these distortions takes a neutral event and interprets it in a way that generates anger. And every one of them can be questioned and challenged. She began to catch herself in these patterns. When her husband forgot to take out the trash, her immediate thought was, "He doesn't respect my time or effort. He expects me to do everything." This thought made her furious. But when she paused to examine it, she realized she was mind-reading. She actually had no idea why he forgot. Maybe he was distracted. Maybe he genuinely forgot. Maybe he had something stressful on his mind. Her interpretation, not his action, was creating her anger. When she changed her thought to something more neutral, he forgot to take out the trash. Without adding any story about what it meant, the anger evaporated. The situation was still frustrating, but it no longer had the power to ruin her emotional state. This is the power of cognitive reframing. Changing your interpretation changes your emotion. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Anger isn't just about thoughts. It's also about needs and values. Chapter 2. The hidden messages of anger. Anger is always a messenger. It's trying to tell you something. The question is, are you listening? He spent most of his life thinking anger was just an irrational emotion that needed to be controlled or eliminated. But everything changed when a therapist asked him a simple question. What is your anger trying to protect? This question stopped him in his tracks. Protect. He'd never thought of anger that way before. But as he reflected on it, he realized something profound. Every time he felt angry, it was because something he valued was being threatened. When someone criticized his work, his anger was protecting his sense of competence and self-worth. When someone was late, his anger was protecting his value of respect and consideration. When someone broke a promise, his anger was protecting his need for trust and reliability. Anger, he discovered, wasn't the enemy. It was an alarm system. It was his psyche's way of saying, "Pay attention. Something important to you is at stake here." This realization transformed his relationship with anger. Instead of seeing it as something bad that needed to be suppressed, he began to see it as information that needed to be decoded. She learned to ask herself a different question. When anger arose, what unmet need is this anger pointing to? Sometimes the answer was respect. Sometimes it was fairness. Sometimes it was safety, or control, or connection. By identifying the underlying need, she could address it directly instead of getting lost in the anger. Instead of yelling at her partner for being on his phone during dinner, she could say, "I'm feeling disconnected from you. I need some quality time together." The need was met, and the anger dissolved. This is what psychologist Marshall Rosenberg called nonviolent communication. At the core of his approach is the understanding that all anger is an expression of unmet needs. Think about the last time you felt really angry. Now, dig deeper. What need was unmet in that situation? Was it respect, fairness, safety, autonomy, understanding, connection? Most people never make this connection. They stay on the surface level of anger, reacting to the trigger, without understanding what's really driving the emotion. But when you can identify the need beneath the anger, you gain power over it. Because here's the key. You can meet your needs without anger. In fact, anger usually makes it harder to get your needs met, not easier. He used to think his anger was effective. When he yelled at people, they usually did what he wanted. But over time, he realized they were complying out of fear, not genuine cooperation. His anger was damaging his relationships, destroying trust, and creating resentment. When he learned to express his needs clearly and calmly, without the anger, something remarkable happened. People actually listened. They wanted to help. His relationships improved. His stress decreased. His needs were met more consistently than they ever had been when he was angry. This is the paradox of anger. We think it gives us power, but it actually makes us powerless. We think it protects us, but it usually creates more problems than it solves. But here's what most people miss. Anger isn't just about the present moment. It's also about the past. She carried anger from her childhood for decades without realizing it. Her father had been critical and dismissive. As a child, she couldn't express her anger toward him, so she buried it. But it didn't disappear. It stayed in her system, creating a reservoir of unprocessed rage. Now, as an adult, whenever someone criticized her or dismissed her feelings, it tapped into that old reservoir. The anger she felt wasn't just about the present situation. It was amplified by decades of accumulated hurt. Psychologists call this emotional baggage or unfinished business. And it's one of the main reasons people overreact to situations. The anger isn't proportional to what's happening now, because it's not just about what's happening now. He realized this when he noticed he would get disproportionately angry at authority figures, his boss, police officers, anyone in a position of power. The anger felt justified in the moment, but when he examined it honestly, he realized it was rooted in his relationship with his father, who had been authoritarian and controlling. Once he understood this pattern, he could separate the past from the present. When his boss gave him feedback, he could notice the old anger arising and remind himself, this is about my father, not about my boss. This is past, not present. The anger would lose its intensity. This process of identifying and releasing old anger is crucial for anyone who wants to be free from reactive patterns. Because until you heal the wounds of the past, they will keep showing up in your present. Many people find therapy or counseling helpful for this work. Others use journaling, meditation, or somatic practices to process stored emotions. The specific method matters less than the commitment to doing the work. She spent 6 months in therapy processing her childhood anger. It wasn't easy. There were tears. There was grief. There was rage that had been locked away for 30 years. But as she released it, she noticed something remarkable. Her present-day anger decreased dramatically. The things that used to set her off no longer had the same charge. She could handle criticism, conflict, and frustration with a calm she'd never experienced before. By healing the past, she liberated her present. This brings us to another crucial insight about anger. It's often a secondary emotion. What does that mean? It means that anger is frequently covering up a more vulnerable emotion underneath: fear, hurt, shame, sadness, feelings that are harder to acknowledge and express. He grew up in a household where showing vulnerability was seen as weakness. Men don't cry. Men don't admit fear. Men don't express hurt. But anger was acceptable. So he learned to misset every vulnerable feeling into anger. When he was scared about money, he got angry at his wife for spending. When he felt hurt by a friend's comment, he got angry and lashed out. When he felt ashamed about a mistake at work, he got angry at his coworkers for not supporting him. The anger was a mask, a shield, a way to avoid feeling the more vulnerable emotions underneath. Once he understood this pattern, he started to pause when anger arose and ask, what am I really feeling beneath this anger? Often, the answer surprised him. Beneath the anger at his wife was fear about providing for his family. Beneath the anger at his friend was hurt about feeling misunderstood. Beneath the anger at his coworkers was shame about not being perfect. When he allowed himself to feel and express these underlying emotions, the anger dissolved, because the anger was never the real problem. It was a symptom pointing to the real problem. She learned this lesson with her teenage daughter. Every time her daughter broke curfew or didn't respond to texts, she would explode in anger, screaming, punishment, lecture. But when she examined what was really happening, she realized the anger was covering up fear. She was terrified something would happen to her daughter, terrified of losing control, terrified of failing as a mother. When she could admit the fear to herself and to her daughter, I get scared when I don't know where you are. I'm afraid something might happen to you. The dynamic shifted completely. Her daughter responded with empathy instead of defensiveness. Communication opened up. The anger wasn't needed anymore, because the real emotion was finally being expressed. This is one of the most powerful practices for transforming anger, getting underneath it to the more vulnerable emotions and needs. It requires courage, because our culture teaches us that vulnerability is weakness. But the truth is exactly opposite. Expressing vulnerability requires far more courage than expressing anger. Anger is easy. Anger is a defense. Vulnerability is what takes real strength. Chapter 3. The cost of anger. Before we go further into how to transform anger, let's be absolutely clear about why this matters. Let's look honestly at what anger costs you. He had spent 20 years believing his anger made him strong, made him respected, made him effective. But when he sat down one day and honestly assessed what anger had cost him, the truth was devastating. His anger had cost him his first marriage. His wife had left because she couldn't take the explosions anymore. His anger had damaged his relationship with his children, who walked on eggshells around him, afraid of triggering his rage. His anger had limited his career, as colleagues avoided working with him and managers passed him over for promotions. His anger had cost him his health. Years of chronic stress had resulted in high blood pressure, digestive problems, and insomnia. His anger had cost him peace of mind, as he replayed conflicts and nursed grudges for days, weeks, sometimes years. When he added it all up, the cost was staggering. And the worst part, most of the things he got angry about didn't even matter. Trivial frustrations, minor inconveniences, situations that resolved themselves or were forgotten within days. He had sacrificed his relationships, his health, his peace, and his happiness on the altar of temporary annoyances that meant nothing in the long run. This is what anger does. It makes you pay an enormous price for very little benefit. The research on anger is clear and consistent. Chronic anger is terrible for your health. It increases your risk of heart disease, stroke, weakened immune system, anxiety, depression, and a host of other problems. Every time you get angry, your body floods with stress hormones. Your blood pressure spikes. Your heart rate increases. Your blood vessels constrict. If this happens occasionally, your body can handle it. But if it happens regularly, chronically, day after day, it's like constantly revving your engine in the red zone. Eventually, something breaks. She watched her father die of a heart attack at 62. The doctors said stress was a major contributing factor. Her father had been an angry man his entire life. Small things would set him off. Traffic, politics, sports, the weather. He lived in a constant state of frustration and irritation. After he died, she made a decision. She would not follow in his footsteps. She would not let anger steal her health and her years. Whatever it took, she would learn to let go. But anger doesn't just cost you your health. It costs you your relationships. Think about the people in your life who are chronically angry. How much time do you want to spend with them? How close do you feel to them? How much do you trust them? If you're honest, the answer is probably not much. Nobody wants to be around angry people. We might tolerate them out of obligation or necessity, but we don't enjoy their company. We don't seek them out. We don't confide in them or feel safe with them. Anger creates distance in relationships. It builds walls instead of bridges. It generates fear instead of love. He noticed this pattern in his own life. The angrier he was, the lonelier he became. People avoided him. Invitations dried up. Friends drifted away. And in his anger, he blamed them. They're not real friends. They can't handle the truth. They're too sensitive. But the truth was simpler and harder to accept. His anger pushed people away. People didn't want to be around someone who might explode at any moment. They didn't feel safe with someone who couldn't control their emotions. When he finally addressed his anger and learned to respond with calm, his relationships transformed. People opened up to him. They sought his advice. They wanted to spend time with him. The warmth and connection he'd been craving his whole life became available to him. But only after he stopped pushing it away with anger. Anger also cost you your peace of mind. She used to lie awake at night, replaying conflicts, thinking of what she should have said, imagining revenge scenarios, nursing grudges. The person who had upset her was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware, while she tortured herself with anger. This is the insanity of anger. It hurts you far more than it hurts the person you're angry at. There's an old saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's absolutely true. Your anger doesn't punish the person who wronged you. It punishes you. Every minute you spend angry is a minute of your life you'll never get back. A minute you could have spent feeling peaceful, joyful, connected, creative. Instead, you're giving that minute to anger. You're letting whoever frustrated you steal that time from you. When he really understood this, it changed everything. He realized that every time he chose anger, he was choosing to suffer. He was volunteering for pain. And the person who had triggered the anger, they were probably living their life, not thinking about him at all. The unfairness of it was staggering. Someone does something thoughtless or rude, and he punishes himself with anger for hours or days afterward. They get to move on while he stews in rage. Once he saw this pattern clearly, the anger lost much of its appeal. Why would he voluntarily suffer? Why would he hand over his peace of mind to random strangers and difficult people? Why would he let them live rent-free in his head? He wouldn't, and neither should you. Anger also costs you your judgment and decision-making ability. When you're angry, you're operating from your primitive brain, not your rational brain. Your prefrontal cortex, which handles complex thinking, planning, and impulse control, essentially goes offline. You're running on instinct and emotion. This is why people say and do things in anger they later regret. In the heat of the moment, sending that nasty email seems justified. Saying those hurtful words feels necessary. Slamming that door provides satisfaction. But once you calm down and your rational brain comes back online, you see clearly. You overreacted. You damaged a relationship. You made things worse. You created problems that didn't exist before. She couldn't count how many times she'd said things in anger she wished she could take back. Words that hurt her children. Accusations that wounded her husband. Complaints that damaged her friendships. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I was just angry," became a frequent refrain. But the damage was done. You can't unring a bell. You can apologize, but you can't erase the memory of what you said. Eventually, she realized that "I was angry" wasn't an excuse. It was an explanation for why she lost control. But it didn't undo the harm. If she wanted to stop hurting people she loved, she needed to stop losing control. This is perhaps the highest cost of anger. It makes you someone you don't want to be. He looked at himself in the mirror one day after screaming at his son over a broken glass. He saw his red face, his clenched fists, the fear in his child's eyes, and he felt sick. This wasn't who he wanted to be. This wasn't the father he had dreamed of becoming. This wasn't the man he respected. Anger was turning him into someone he despised. Someone cruel. Someone out of control. Someone who hurt the people he loved most. That moment in the mirror was his wake-up call. He could keep living this way. Keep being ruled by anger. Keep paying these enormous costs. Or he could change. The choice was his. And it's yours too. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Control. One of the deepest reasons we hold on to anger is because we believe it gives us control. But this is an illusion. In reality, anger makes you completely out of control. She spent years believing that her anger kept people in line. When her employees made mistakes, she would explode, and they would scramble to fix things. It felt effective. It felt powerful. But over time, she noticed something troubling. Her best employees kept leaving. Her team seemed anxious and demotivated. Productivity was declining. Mistakes were increasing, not decreasing. When she finally asked for honest feedback, the truth was hard to hear. Her anger was creating a culture of fear. People weren't performing better because of her anger. They were making more mistakes because they were stressed and anxious. They weren't being innovative because they were afraid of her reaction. Her anger wasn't giving her control. It was creating chaos. This is the central paradox of anger. We use it to try to control situations and people, but it actually makes everything more unpredictable and difficult to manage. Think about it. When you're angry, are you in control? Or is the anger in control of you? When you're yelling, when your heart is racing, when you're saying things you'll regret, when you can't think clearly or see the situation objectively, are you really in control? Of course not. You're completely controlled by the emotion. You're reactive instead of responsive. You're driven by primitive impulses Instead of conscious choice, he had convinced himself that his aggressive driving, honking his horn, cutting people off in retaliation, was him not letting people get away with it. He was teaching them a lesson. He was maintaining control of the situation. But one day, his son was in the car and asked innocently, "Dad, why do you let strangers make you so upset?" The question stunned him. His son was right. These strangers weren't controlling his behavior. Their rudeness was. He thought he was in control, but he was completely controlled by his reactions to other people. Real control doesn't mean controlling other people or external circumstances. Real control means controlling yourself, your reactions, your responses, your emotional state. And here's the beautiful truth. That's the only thing you can truly control anyway. You can't control what other people do. You can't control the traffic. You can't control the weather. You can't control the economy. You can't control most of what happens in your life, but you can control how you respond to all of it. This insight is at the heart of Stoic philosophy, which has been teaching people how to manage anger for over 2,000 years. The Stoics understood something profound. The only thing you truly own is your mind and your choices. Everything else, your reputation, your possessions, your relationships, your health, your life itself, can be taken from you or changed without your permission. But no one can make you angry without your permission. No one can disturb your peace unless you let them. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." She discovered the Stoics during a particularly difficult period of her life. Everything seemed to be falling apart. Her business was struggling. Her marriage was strained. Her health was declining. She felt angry at the unfairness of it all. Angry at the circumstances. Angry at the people who had let her down. Then she read this passage from Epictetus. "Some things are within our control, and some things are not. It is only after you have faced up to this fundamental rule and learned to distinguish between what you can and can't control, that inner tranquility and outer effectiveness become possible." Something clicked. She had been exhausting herself trying to control things that were not within her control, and neglecting the one thing that was, her own mind and responses. She couldn't control whether her business succeeded or failed, but she could control her effort, her decisions, her attitude. She couldn't control whether her husband changed, but she could control how she communicated, how she responded, whether she stayed or left. She couldn't control her illness, but she could control her treatment decisions, her lifestyle, her mental state. This shift in focus was revolutionary. Instead of raging against circumstances, she directed her energy toward the only place it could be effective, her own choices and actions. The anger didn't solve any problems. It just made her feel worse and think less clearly. But taking responsibility for what she could control, accepting what she couldn't, and knowing the difference between the two, that changed everything. This is what the Serenity Prayer captures so beautifully. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Anger usually arises when we're trying to change things we cannot change, or refusing to accept things we cannot control. Someone is rude to you. You can't control their rudeness, but you get angry as if your anger will somehow retroactively make them not rude. It won't. It can't. The rudeness already happened. Your anger doesn't change the past. It doesn't improve the present. And it usually makes the future worse. He learned this lesson through a painful experience. His teenage son came out as gay. His first reaction was anger. Anger at his son for choosing this. Anger at himself for somehow failing as a father. Anger at the situation. He spent months angry, trying to change what couldn't be changed. His son was who he was. No amount of anger would alter that fact. Finally, exhausted and heartbroken, he accepted reality. His son was gay. That was the truth. He could accept it and maintain a relationship with his son, or he could keep being angry and lose his son. When he chose acceptance, the anger dissolved, and something beautiful happened. He got to know his son as he actually was, not as he had imagined he should be. Their relationship deepened. The love was still there, just freed from the prison of expectations and anger. This is the profound peace that comes from accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it were. Reality doesn't care about your preferences. It doesn't negotiate. It simply is. You can accept it and work with it, or you can resist it and suffer. Anger is always a form of resistance to reality. This shouldn't be happening. This isn't fair. This isn't right. This needs to change. Maybe it does need to change. Maybe it is unfair. But the anger doesn't change it. The anger just makes you suffer while reality remains exactly as it is. She had a chronic illness that caused daily pain. For years she was angry about it. Angry at her body for betraying her. Angry at the unfairness. Angry at God or the universe for allowing this. The anger didn't reduce her pain. It amplified it. Physical pain plus anger about the pain equals total misery. Then she read about a different approach. Radical acceptance. Not approval. Not liking it. Just accepting that this was her reality. When she stopped fighting against her condition and accepted it, something shifted. The pain was still there, but the suffering decreased dramatically. She could plan her life around her limitations instead of raging against them. She could focus on what was still possible, instead of grieving what was lost. The acceptance didn't mean giving up or not seeking treatment. It meant working with reality, instead of against it. And working with reality is always more effective than fighting it. This brings us to one of the most important skills for managing anger: distinguishing between problems and facts. A problem is something you can solve. A fact is something you must accept. Traffic is heavy. That's a fact. You can't solve it in this moment. You can accept it and use the time to listen to music or an audiobook. Or you can be angry about it and suffer. Your flight is delayed. That's a fact. You can accept it and read a book or work on your laptop. Or you can be angry and make yourself miserable while still having to wait for the flight. Your coworker is incompetent. That might be a problem you can address through management or HR. Or it might be a fact you need to accept and work around. But getting angry about it doesn't make them more competent. He started asking himself this question every time he felt anger rising. Is this a problem I can solve, or a fact I need to accept? If it was a problem, he would focus on solutions instead of anger. Anger doesn't solve problems. Clear thinking, planning, and action do. If it was a fact, he would practice acceptance. Acceptance didn't mean he liked it. It just meant he acknowledged reality and stopped wasting energy resisting what couldn't be changed. This simple question transformed his relationship with frustration and anger. Most of the things he used to get angry about were facts, not problems. And for the actual problems, anger made it harder to solve them effectively. True control, true power, comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from controlling your inner state. And the first step to controlling your inner state is accepting what you cannot control externally. This is the wisdom that has been taught by spiritual traditions across cultures for thousands of years. From Buddhism's teaching on non-attachment, to Christianity's "Thy will be done," to Islam's concept of surrender to Allah, to the Stoics' dichotomy of control, all pointing to the same truth. Peace comes from acceptance. Suffering comes from resistance. And anger is the emotion of resistance. Chapter 5. The practice of presence. There's a reason anger seems so automatic and unstoppable. You're not present when it happens. Think about the last time you got angry. Where was your mind? Was it fully in the present moment? Or was it in the past, replaying what just happened? Or in the future, imagining consequences or revenge? He realized that he was never angry about what was actually happening in the present moment. He was angry about his thoughts about what happened, his interpretations of what it meant, his predictions about what it would lead to. The present moment itself, the pure sensory experience of right now, didn't contain anger. The anger existed only in his mental narratives about the moment. This is a profound realization. Anger requires you to leave the present moment. It requires you to be in your head, in your stories, in your judgments and interpretations. When you're fully present, fully aware of your immediate sensory experience without the layer of mental commentary, anger cannot exist. She discovered this through meditation. She had always dismissed meditation as something for hippies or monks, not practical people with real problems. But after reading about the neuroscience of mindfulness and its effects on emotional regulation, she decided to try it. The practice was simple. Sit quietly, focus on the breath, and when the mind wanders, gently bring it back. It seemed too simple to be effective. But after a few weeks of daily practice, she noticed something remarkable. She had more space between stimulus and response. When something frustrating happened, there was a brief pause where she could choose how to respond instead of automatically reacting. That pause was the key. In that gap between trigger and response, she had freedom. This is what mindfulness creates: awareness of the present moment, and the thoughts and emotions arising in it. And with awareness comes choice. The neuroscience backs this up. Regular meditation practice actually changes the brain. It strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for emotional regulation and rational thinking. It reduces the reactivity of the amygdala, your brain's alarm system. It increases gray matter in areas associated with self-awareness and compassion. In other words, meditation literally rewires your brain to be less reactive and more responsive, less controlled by emotion, and more capable of conscious choice. He started with just 5 minutes a day, sitting quietly, focusing on his breath, observing his thoughts without getting caught up in them. At first, his mind was chaos. Constant thoughts, constant distraction, constant restlessness. But he stuck with it. Gradually, he began to see his thoughts as just thoughts, not facts. He began to notice the gap between a thought arising and his reaction to it. This skill translated directly to his anger. When someone cut him off in traffic, he would notice the thought, "That person is an idiot who did that to disrespect me." And he would recognize it as just a thought, not necessarily true. In that recognition, he had a choice: follow the thought into anger, or let it pass and choose a different response. More often than not, he chose the different response. Not because he was suppressing the anger, but because he simply saw it wasn't necessary or helpful. This is the power of presence. It allows you to see your mental processes clearly enough to not be controlled by them. But presence isn't just about formal meditation. It's about bringing awareness to everyday moments. She learned to practice presence while washing dishes, feeling the warm water, noticing the sensation of the sponge, hearing the sound of the water. She practiced presence while walking, feeling each step, noticing the movement of her hurry, observing the environment. These simple practices trained her brain to stay in the present moment instead of getting lost in mental narratives. And the more she practiced presence in neutral situations, the easier it became to access presence in challenging situations. When her teenager was being difficult, instead of immediately reacting with anger, she would take a breath and become present. Feel her feet on the ground. Notice the sensations in her body. This simple act would break the automatic pattern and give her access to a wiser, calmer response. Presence also revealed something else. Most of what she worried about or got angry about never actually happened. Her mind was constantly creating catastrophic scenarios, interpreting neutral situations as threatening, and generating emotional reactions to imagined problems. When she stayed present with what was actually happening, not her thoughts about what might happen or what it meant, life was much more peaceful. There's a famous Zen saying, "If you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. If you're at peace, you're living in the present." Anger, like depression and anxiety, takes you out of the present. It either pulls you into the past, ruminating on what happened, or pushes you into the future, imagining consequences or revenge. The present moment, the actual experience of right now, is almost always manageable. It's your thoughts about the moment that create suffering. He tested this theory one day when he was stuck in terrible traffic. Instead of his usual fuming and cursing, he decided to stay completely present. He noticed the sensation of sitting, the feeling of his hands on the wheel, the sound of the music playing, the sight of the cars around him. When thoughts arose like "this is terrible," or "I'm going to be late," he noticed them as thoughts and returned to present moment awareness. Something unexpected happened. He didn't suffer. The traffic was still there. He was still going to be late. But without the layer of angry thoughts, the experience was just neutral. He was sitting in a car. The traffic didn't make him suffer. His angry thoughts about the traffic made him suffer. And when he stayed present without those thoughts, there was no suffering. This doesn't mean you become passive or don't take action. If there's another route, you take it. If you can call ahead and let people know you're late, you do that. But you do it from a place of calm presence, not reactive anger. Presence also allows you to respond to situations more skillfully, because you see them more clearly. When she was caught up in angry thoughts, everything was filtered through that anger. Her perception was distorted. She would misinterpret people's words and actions, seeing attacks where none existed, finding confirmation for her anger everywhere she looked. When she was present, without the filter of anger, she could see situations more accurately. She could hear what people were actually saying instead of what she thought they were saying. She could notice context and nuance instead of just reacting to triggers. This clearer perception led to better decisions and better outcomes. Problems that seemed insurmountable when she was angry turned out to have simple solutions when she was present and calm. One practice that helped him develop presence was the stop technique. Zeph, stop. Literally pause whatever you're doing. Take a breath. Bring your attention to your breathing. Observe. Notice what's happening in your body, your emotions, your thoughts. Proceed. Move forward with awareness and intention. Whenever he felt anger rising, he would use this technique. Stop. Take a breath. Observe the anger without judging it or acting on it. Then proceed with a conscious choice instead of an automatic reaction. At first, he could only do this sometimes. Often, he would remember the technique after he'd already reacted with anger. But gradually, through repetition, it became more automatic. The pause became longer. The awareness became clearer. The choice became easier. Another powerful practice for developing presence is body scanning. When you feel anger arising, instead of getting caught up in the thoughts, bring your attention to the physical sensations in your body. She would notice the heat in her face, the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her chest, the clenching of her jaw. By bringing non-judgmental awareness to these sensations, something interesting happened. They would intensify for a moment, then begin to dissipate. Emotions are partly physical sensations. When you observe those sensations with acceptance instead of resistance, they naturally rise and fall like waves. But when you resist them or get caught up in the stories that fuel them, they persist and intensify. This is another paradox. The way to reduce anger is not to suppress it or fight it, but to allow it and observe it with curious, non-judgmental awareness. He tried this one day. When someone at work took credit for his idea in a meeting, the immediate surge of anger was intense. His impulse was to confront the person, to call them out, to defend himself. Instead, he excused himself to the bathroom. He stood there and simply observed the anger. He felt the heat, the tension, the racing thoughts. He didn't try to make it go away. He didn't indulge it either. He just watched it with interest, like a scientist observing a phenomenon. Within a few minutes, the intensity decreased. His thinking cleared. He could see the situation more objectively and consider his options. He decided to address it privately with his colleague, rather than making a scene in the meeting. The outcome was much better than it would have been if he'd acted on his first impulse. This is the gift of presence. It gives you the space to choose your response, instead of being controlled by your reactions. But presence isn't always easy. Especially in the beginning, your mind is used to wandering, to getting caught up in thoughts, to leaving the present moment. It takes practice to train it to stay here. Now, she found that the more she practiced, the easier it became. Like strengthening a muscle, her ability to stay present grew stronger with use. And as it grew stronger, anger had less and less power over her. Not because she was suppressing it or forcing it away, but because she was meeting it with awareness. And awareness is anger's natural antidote. Chapter 6. Rewriting your anger stories. We've explored how thoughts create emotions, but let's go deeper into the specific stories that fuel anger and how to rewrite them. Every time you get angry, there's a story running in your mind. Often you're not even consciously aware of it, because it happens so fast. But the story is there. And it's the real source of the anger. He started paying attention to these stories after learning about cognitive behavioral therapy. He would catch himself mid-anger and ask, "What story am I telling myself right now?" When his wife forgot their anniversary, the story was, "She doesn't care about me. I'm not important to her. Our relationship doesn't matter to her." This story created intense anger and hurt. But was it true? When he questioned it honestly, he realized it wasn't. His wife showed she cared in many ways. She was dealing with a stressful situation at work and genuinely forgot the date. It wasn't about him or their relationship. It was about her being overwhelmed and distracted. When he changed the story to something more accurate, she forgot because she's stressed and overwhelmed, not because she doesn't care. The anger evaporated. He felt disappointed, but not enraged. He could respond with understanding instead of attack. This is the power of questioning your stories. Most anger is based on inaccurate interpretations, mind reading, and assumptions that aren't true. She realized she had several recurring anger stories that showed up in different situations. People are trying to take advantage of me. Nobody respects me. I always have to do everything myself. People should know better. This is unfair. These stories were like programs running in the background of her mind, ready to activate whenever something triggered them, and they created enormous unnecessary anger. When she started examining these stories, she found they were all distortions. "People are trying to take advantage of me" was mind reading. She had no evidence most people were intentionally trying to take advantage. Many were just busy, distracted, or unaware. "Nobody respects me" was all or nothing thinking. Some people didn't respect her, but many did. She was focusing on the few who didn't and ignoring all the evidence of respect. "I always have to do everything myself" was an exaggeration. Yes, she did more than she wanted to, but always and everything were false. Others contributed too. "People should know better" was an unrealistic expectation. People operate at their current level of awareness and skill. Expecting them to be different than they are is a recipe for constant anger. "This is unfair" was judging reality. Fairness is a human concept. Reality simply is. Things happen without regard to fairness. Expecting the world to be fair guarantees anger. Once she identified these faulty stories, she could replace them with more accurate, helpful ones. "Most people are doing their best and aren't trying to harm me. Some people respect me, some don't, and that's okay. I don't need everyone's respect. I can ask for help instead of martyring myself." People operate at their current level of awareness. I can communicate my needs clearly instead of expecting them to read my mind. Reality is neutral. Things happen. My job is to respond skillfully, not to judge whether it's fair. These new stories didn't just reduce her anger. They actually made her more effective at getting her needs met. The most powerful tool for rewriting anger stories is Byron Katie's The Work, which consists of 4 questions. 1. Is it true? 2. Can you absolutely know that it's true? 3. How do you react when you believe that thought? 4. Who would you be without that thought? He used these questions on a thought that had been fueling his anger for months. "My boss doesn't value my contributions. Is it true?" Well, sometimes it seemed like it. He didn't get the raise he wanted. His ideas were sometimes dismissed. Can you absolutely know that it's true? No. He couldn't read his boss's mind. He didn't know what his boss was thinking or feeling. There could be many reasons for the boss's decisions that had nothing to do with not valuing him. How do you react when you believe that thought? He felt angry, resentful, unmotivated. He stopped putting in extra effort. He complained to coworkers. He looked for evidence to confirm his belief. The thought made him miserable and less effective at work. Who would you be without that thought? He would be free. He would focus on doing good work for its own sake, not for validation. He wouldn't take his boss's decisions personally. He would be happier and more productive. These questions didn't just reduce his anger. They liberated him from a thought pattern that was poisoning his work life. Then comes the turnaround, where you look for ways the opposite of your thought might be as true or truer. I don't value my contributions. Was this true? Yes, actually. He was constantly dismissing his own work, focusing on what he did wrong, never celebrating what he did right. My boss values my contributions. Could this be true? When he looked for evidence, he found plenty. His boss had promoted him last year, had given him important projects, had praised his work in meetings. He'd been so focused on the one disappointment, the raise, that he'd ignored all the evidence of value. This process completely transformed his relationship with his anger. The thought that had been creating resentment and bitterness was revealed to be not just inaccurate, but backwards. He was the one not valuing his contributions, then projecting that onto his boss. Another powerful reframe is shifting from judgment to curiosity. When something frustrating happens, the immediate reaction is judgment. This is bad. This is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. But what if you responded with curiosity instead? I wonder why this happened. I wonder what I can learn from this. I wonder how this person is seeing this situation. She practiced this shift during a conflict with her sister. Her initial story was, she's being irrational and difficult. She always does this. She never listens to me. When she shifted to curiosity, she asked herself, I wonder what she's really upset about. I wonder what need of hers isn't being met. I wonder how she's interpreting this situation. With curiosity instead of judgment, she could actually listen to her sister. And when she listened, she understood her sister was feeling left out and unimportant, not trying to be difficult. Once she understood the real issue, resolution was easy. The anger story of she's being difficult would have perpetuated the conflict. The curious inquiry, what's really going on for her, led to understanding and connection. This brings us to one of the most important story rewrites. Shifting from this person is attacking me to this person is suffering. When someone is rude, critical, angry, or difficult, your immediate interpretation is usually, this is about me. They're attacking me. They're trying to hurt me. But here's a truth that changes everything. Hurt people hurt people. People who are at peace don't attack others. People who are suffering do. That rude cashier isn't rude because of you. They're rude because they're having a terrible day, dealing with pain you know nothing about, overwhelmed by circumstances you can't see. That critical coworker isn't criticizing you to hurt you. They're insecure about their own performance and projecting that insecurity onto you. That angry driver isn't trying to ruin your day. They're late for something important, stressed about something in their life, operating from their own panic. When he started seeing difficult people as suffering people, his anger transformed into compassion. The person who was rude to him in the grocery store, he imagined they might have just received bad news from a doctor, or just lost a job, or were dealing with chronic pain. He didn't know they're there, but he knew that happy, content people don't lash out at strangers. This doesn't mean accepting abusive behavior or allowing yourself to be mistreated. You can set boundaries with compassion. You can protect yourself while understanding that the person's behavior is about them, not about you. She had a friend who would make passive-aggressive comments that used to enrage her. Her story was, she's jealous of me and trying to bring me down. When she reframed it as, she's deeply insecure, and this is how she manages those feelings, everything changed. She felt compassion instead of anger. She could either address it kindly or simply distance herself without the emotional charge. The behavior didn't change, but her response did. And her response was the only thing she could control anyway. Another crucial story rewrite. From this is happening to me to this is happening for me. This doesn't mean everything is good or happens for a divine purpose. It means that every experience, including difficult ones, can be used for your growth, if you choose to see it that way. He used to see every frustration as something being done to him, an injustice he had to endure. This story made him a victim, powerless and bitter. When he started asking, "What is this teaching me? How can I grow from this? What is this situation revealing about me that I need to see?" he reclaimed his power. His boss's difficult management style wasn't just something to endure, it was teaching him patience, communication skills, and how to work with difficult people. His wife's different communication style wasn't a character flaw to resent, it was showing him his expectations and teaching him to appreciate difference. This shift doesn't minimize real difficulties or pain, but it does transform you from a victim of your circumstances into an active learner and growth. The final story rewrite is perhaps the most powerful, recognizing that anger is optional. For most of his life, he believed anger was inevitable. When bad things happened, you got angry. That was just how it worked. But then, he learned about Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps. Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Frankl experienced horrors beyond imagination. He lost everything: his family, his home, his profession, his freedom, almost his life. If anyone had a right to anger, bitterness, and hatred, it was him. But he chose differently. He chose to find meaning in suffering. He chose to maintain his dignity and humanity in the midst of inhumanity. He chose his response. If Frankl could choose his response in a concentration camp, could he choose his response when someone cut him off in traffic? When his boss was unfair? When his teenager was difficult? Of course he could. Anger was a choice. Not always an easy choice. Not automatic, but always available. This realization was both empowering and humbling. Empowering because it meant he had control. Humbling because it meant he couldn't blame his anger on others anymore. His anger was his responsibility, his choice, his power, and so is yours. Chapter 7. The Power of Compassion. There's one emotion that is incompatible with anger: compassion. When you feel genuine compassion for someone, you cannot simultaneously feel anger toward them. She discovered this truth during a meditation retreat focused on loving-kindness practice. The instruction was simple: bring to mind someone who frustrated or angered you, and then wish them well. Genuinely wish for their happiness, their peace, their freedom from suffering. At first, it felt impossible. How could she wish well for the coworker who had undermined her? How could she want happiness for the family member who had hurt her? But she stuck with the practice. And gradually, something shifted. As she imagined this person's suffering, their fears, their wounds, their humanity, her anger softened. She didn't have to approve of their behavior. She didn't have to excuse what they did, but she could recognize them as a fellow human being who, like her, wanted to be happy and wanted to avoid suffering. This recognition is the essence of compassion, and it's the most powerful antidote to anger ever discovered. The neuroscience supports this. Studies show that practicing loving-kindness meditation increases activity in brain regions associated with empathy and decreases activity in regions associated with anger and judgment. Compassion literally rewires your brain away from anger. But compassion doesn't just change how you feel. It changes how others respond to you. He had spent years in conflict with his ex-wife over custody of their children. Every interaction was hostile. Every email was an attack. Every exchange was a battle. The anger between them was destroying both of them and hurting their kids. Then he tried something radical. He approached her with compassion. He thought about how difficult the divorce must be for her, how scared she probably felt about losing time with the kids, how hurt she must have been by the end of their marriage. In his next email, instead of his usual defensiveness and counterattacks, he wrote, "I know this is hard for both of us. I know you're a good mother who loves our kids. I want to find a way forward that works for everyone." Her response shocked him. Instead of the usual hostility, she wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I want the same thing." From that moment, their relationship shifted. Not instantly, not perfectly, but significantly. The compassion he offered created space for her to soften too. This is the paradox of compassion. By offering it to others, you free yourself from anger. But the compassion that may be most important is self-compassion. She realized she was far angrier at herself than at anyone else. When she made a mistake, she would berate herself internally for hours. When she failed to meet her own expectations, the self-criticism was brutal. This anger at herself leaked out into anger at others. Because people who are harsh with themselves are harsh with others. People who cannot forgive themselves cannot truly forgive others. Self-compassion researcher Kristen Neff describes 3 components of self-compassion. Self-kindness instead of self-judgment. 2. Common humanity instead of isolation. 3. Mindfulness instead of over-identification. She began practicing these. When she made a mistake, instead of "I'm such an idiot," she would say, "I'm human, and humans make mistakes. This is a chance to learn." Instead of feeling like she was the only one struggling, she would remind herself, "Everyone struggles with this. This is part of the human experience." Instead of getting lost in harsh self-criticism, she would notice the thoughts with mindfulness. "I'm having harsh thoughts about myself right now," and then let them pass without believing them. This practice transformed her relationship with herself and with her anger. The kinder she was to herself, the less angry she was at others. There's a beautiful Buddhist practice called Tonglen, which means sending and receiving. In this practice, you imagine breathing in someone's suffering and breathing out compassion and peace. He found this practice incredibly powerful. When someone angered him, instead of attacking or withdrawing, he would practice Tonglen. He would imagine their pain, their fear, whatever suffering was causing them to act as they did. He would breathe it in, feel it in his own heart. Then he would breathe out compassion, wishing for their freedom from that suffering. It sounds counterintuitive. Why would you breathe in someone's suffering? But the practice works because it breaks the barrier between you and them. It dissolves the story of me versus you, and reveals the deeper truth. We're all human, all struggling, all trying to be happy and avoid pain. From that recognition, anger cannot survive. Compassion fills the space where anger used to be. This doesn't mean being naive or allowing harmful behavior. Compassion can coexist with boundaries, with consequences, with justice. She had to fire an employee who was consistently underperforming and creating problems for the team. The old her would have done it with anger, maybe even some satisfaction at finally getting rid of the problem. But she approached it with compassion. She recognized how difficult it would be for him to lose his job. She imagined his fear about how he would support himself. She felt genuine care for his well-being, even as she did what was necessary for the company. The termination conversation was still difficult, but it was kind. She offered him resources for job searching. She gave him a good reference for the skills he did have. She treated him with dignity. He later told a mutual friend that even though getting fired was one of the hardest experiences of his life, her compassion during it made a profound difference. He didn't leave bitter and angry. He left with gratitude for how he was treated. This is the power of compassion. It allows you to do difficult things without anger, to uphold boundaries without attack, to protect yourself without hatred. Compassion is often confused with weakness or doormat behavior, but it's actually the opposite. It takes tremendous strength to meet aggression with compassion, to respond to attack with kindness, to hold boundaries with love. He discovered this when dealing with his aging father, who had become increasingly difficult and critical. His first impulse was always anger. His father would say something hurtful, and he would want to snap back, to defend himself, to hurt his father the way his father was hurting him. But then he would remember, his father was in pain. Physical pain from his declining health, emotional pain from losing his independence, existential pain from facing his mortality. The criticism wasn't really about his son. It was his father's pain, leaking out. When he could see it this way, He could respond with compassion. "I know this is hard for you, Dad. I'm here for you." His father didn't always respond well to compassion. Sometimes he rejected it, or lashed out more. But his son's anger didn't increase the suffering in the situation. His compassion at least gave his father the option of something different. Deal. And over time, slowly, his father did soften. The compassion offered consistently, despite the rejection, eventually created an opening for connection. This is what compassion does. It creates possibilities that anger forecloses. There's a profound practice from Tibetan Buddhism called equalizing self and other. The practice involves recognizing that everyone, just like you, wants to be happy and wants to avoid suffering. Everyone, just like you, experiences pain and fear and hope and love. When you deeply recognize this equality, it becomes very difficult to sustain anger. How can you be angry at someone who is fundamentally just like you, doing their best with the understanding and skills they have? She would practice this on the subway. Looking at the strangers around her, she would think, just like me. This person wants to be happy, just like me. This person has experienced loss, just like me. This person is afraid of something, just like me. This person loves someone. It sounds simple, almost silly, but it dissolved the sense of separation that anger requires. These weren't just obstacles in her way, potential sources of frustration. They were fellow human beings on the same journey. When someone bumped into her, or was rude, instead of immediate anger, she would think, just like me. This person is having a hard day, just like me. This person sometimes makes mistakes. The anger couldn't gain traction against this recognition of shared humanity. Thich Nhat Hanh teaches a practice called beginning anew, which involves 4 steps: watering flowers, expressing appreciation, 2. Expressing regrets, acknowledging your mistakes, 3. Expressing hurts, sharing your pain without blame, 4. Sharing difficulties, explaining challenges you're facing. He used this practice to heal a relationship with his brother that had been damaged by years of accumulated resentments and anger. Instead of attacking his brother for past hurts, he started by expressing appreciation. "I'm grateful for how you supported me when Dad died." Then he expressed his own regrets. "I'm sorry I missed your daughter's graduation. That was wrong of me." Then he shared his hurt. "When you didn't acknowledge my promotion, I felt unseen and unimportant." Finally, he shared a current difficulty. "I'm struggling with feeling like we've lost our closeness." His brother responded in kind. The conversation that could have been another angry confrontation became a healing dialogue. The compassion they offered each other dissolved years of anger. This is the ultimate power of compassion. It heals anger, wounds, and separates. Compassion heals and connects. But compassion doesn't mean you never feel anger. It means that when anger arises, you meet it with the same compassion you would offer others. When she felt anger rising, instead of judging herself, "I shouldn't be angry. What's wrong with me?" she would offer herself compassion. "I'm feeling angry right now. This is difficult. It's okay to feel this. What do I need?" This compassionate approach to her own anger paradoxically made it dissolve faster than when she fought it or judged herself for it. The path from anger to compassion isn't about never feeling angry. It's about transforming the anger through understanding, through connection, through recognizing the humanity in yourself and others. Every time you choose compassion over anger, you strengthen that neural pathway. You make it easier to choose compassion next time. You become, gradually, a more compassionate person. And a compassionate person is a person who cannot be controlled by anger anymore. Chapter 8. Practical Strategies for Real Life. Understanding anger is crucial. But you also need practical tools for the moment when someone cuts you off in traffic, or your teenager slams a door, or your coworker takes credit for your idea. Let's get practical. The pause button. He learned this from a therapist. When you feel anger rising, press an imaginary pause button. Literally picture yourself pressing pause. Then, take 3 slow breaths. This breaks the automatic reaction. Those few seconds give your prefrontal cortex time to come back online. It's not about suppressing the anger. It's about creating space to respond instead of react. She would excuse herself to the bathroom when family dinners got tense. Just those few minutes away from the trigger, breathing deeply, looking at herself in the mirror, would reset her nervous system enough to respond skillfully. The body scan. When anger hits, it's all in your head. Thoughts racing, stories building, judgments flying. Bringing awareness to your body interrupts this. He would feel his feet on the ground. Notice the sensation of his hands. Take inventory of where he felt tension. This simple act of moving attention from thoughts to body would reduce the intensity of the anger significantly. The body scan also reveals something important. Emotions are temporary. If you just observe the physical sensations without feeding them with angry thoughts, they rise and fall like waves. But if you keep adding fuel with thoughts, they persist. The 10-10-10 rule. She read about this in a business book and applied it to anger. Will this matter in 10 minutes? 10 hours? 10 days? When someone was rude to her in a store, she would ask, will I care about this in 10 minutes? Probably not. In 10 hours? Definitely not. In 10 days? I won't even remember it. This perspective helped her see that most triggers weren't worth the energy of anger. She was volunteering to suffer over things that wouldn't matter at all. Very soon, for bigger issues, the timeline might be different. Will this matter in 10 days, 10 months, 10 years? But the principle was the same. Perspective reduces unnecessary anger. The response delay. He made a rule. Never respond to an anger-inducing email or text immediately. Wait at least 2 hours, preferably 24. He would draft the angry response to get it out of his system. Then he would save it as a draft. Later, when he was calmer, he would delete the draft and write a measured, effective response. This one rule prevented more damage than any other strategy, because the things we say or write in anger often haunt us far longer than whatever triggered the anger in the first place. The pattern interrupt. When she felt anger spiraling, she would do something to completely change her state. Splash cold water on her face. Do jumping jacks. Sing a silly song. Pet the dog. Anything that was incompatible with the angry state. This worked because emotions are partly created by your physiology. When you change your body, you change your emotional state. You can't be genuinely angry while singing a silly song or petting a dog. Your nervous system doesn't work that way. The empathy flip. He would force himself to see the situation from the other person's perspective. Why might they have done what they did? What might they be experiencing? What's their context? His teenager didn't clean his room, despite being asked 5 times. His immediate reaction was anger. He's disrespecting me. He's lazy. He doesn't care. When he flipped to empathy, he's overwhelmed with schoolwork. He's struggling with friend drama. His room is the last thing on his mind right now. The empathy flip didn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior, but it meant understanding it, which made it possible to address it without anger. The gratitude pivot. She discovered that it's neurologically difficult to feel anger and gratitude simultaneously. So when anger arose, she would force herself to list 3 things she was grateful for. This wasn't about denying the problem or being fake positive. It was about shifting her neurological state. After listing 3 gratitudes, the anger would be less intense, and she could address the issue more skillfully. The anger journal. He kept a journal specifically for anger. When he got angry, he would write, "What happened? Just the facts. No interpretation. What story did I tell myself about what happened? What emotion did that story create? Is the story true? Can I absolutely know it's true? What's a more accurate story? What need of mine wasn't met? What can I do about it without anger?" This practice trained him to deconstruct his anger, to see the patterns, to catch the recurring stories. Over time, he got faster at this process, until he could do it mentally in real time. The countdown method. When she felt anger at peak intensity, she would count backward from a 100 by 7s. 100, 93, 86, 79. This forced her brain to engage the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, which reduced the activation of the amygdala, the emotional brain. You can't do mental math and maintain peak anger simultaneously. The movement release. He discovered that anger is energy stuck in the body. So he would go for a run, hit a punching bag, do push-ups, go for a bike ride, anything to move the energy through and out. This wasn't about expressing anger at someone or something. It was about discharging the physical energy of anger, so he could think clearly. After a hard workout, the anger that seemed so justified and intense would often seem silly or manageable. The "so what" technique. She learned this from a coach. When something triggered anger, she would ask, "So what? My coworker didn't give me credit for my idea. So what? So, it's unfair and disrespectful. So what? So I feel angry about it. So, what will the anger accomplish? Nothing. It won't change what happened. So, what are you going to do instead? Address it directly or let it go, and focus on my own work." The "so what" questioning revealed that most anger doesn't accomplish anything useful. It just makes you feel worse. When you see this clearly, the anger loses its appeal. The anchoring phrase. He chose a simple phrase to repeat when anger arose. "This too shall pass." It reminded him that the anger was temporary. The situation was temporary. Everything is temporary. This perspective helped him not get so caught up in the intensity of the moment. Other people use, "Let it go. Not my circus. Not my monkeys. Is this worth my peace? I choose calm." The specific phrase matters less than having something to anchor you when you feel yourself getting swept away. The timeout strategy. She made an agreement with her husband. Either of them could call a timeout during a conflict. No questions asked. They would separate for at least 30 minutes before continuing the conversation. This prevented escalation. When anger was high, nothing productive happened anyway. The timeout gave both people a chance to calm down, think more clearly, and return to the conversation with less reactivity. The key was that timeout wasn't punishment or withdrawal. It was a mutual agreement to pause for everyone's benefit. The compassion statement. When he felt anger at someone, he would force himself to say, out loud, or in his mind, "Just like me. This person wants to be happy. Just like me. This person wants to avoid suffering. Just like me. This person has fears and insecurities." This statement of common humanity would dissolve much of his anger. It's hard to stay angry at someone when you're actively recognizing their humanity. The reality check questions. She developed a series of questions to reality check her anger. Is this actually a big deal? Or am I making it bigger than it is? Will I remember this next week? Next month? Next year? What's the worst that could actually happen here? Am I making assumptions about people's intentions? What evidence do I have for my interpretation? Could there be another explanation? These questions helped her see when she was catastrophizing or distorting reality, which was most of the time. The pre-commitment. He would decide in advance how he wanted to handle certain situations. Before going to his in-laws, who always triggered him, he would decide, no matter what they say, I will respond with kindness and humor. Having a pre-commitment made it easier to follow through in the moment, because he'd already decided. He wasn't making a decision in the heat of emotion. He was simply executing a decision made when he was calm and rational. The celebration of wins. Every time she successfully managed anger, even a little bit, she would celebrate. I didn't yell at the kids today. I took a breath before responding to that email. I chose to let that comment go. This positive reinforcement trained her brain to repeat the behavior. The brain moves toward what gets rewarded. By celebrating her wins, she was rewiring her neural pathways toward calm. The consequence visualization. Before reacting in anger, he would visualize the consequences. If I yell at my son, he'll shut down and we won't communicate. If I send this angry email, my relationship with this coworker will be damaged. If I honk and flip off this driver, I might escalate to road rage. Seeing the consequences clearly helped him choose differently. Short-term satisfaction of expressing anger versus long-term consequences of damaged relationships. The choice became obvious. The energy redirection. She realized anger is just energy, powerful energy. So instead of directing it outward at others, or letting it eat away at her inside, she redirected it. When she felt angry, she would channel that energy into productive action, deep cleaning the house, tackling a difficult work project, exercising intensely, creating art. The energy that could have destroyed relationships instead created value. This wasn't suppression. It was transformation. The perspective shift questions. He kept a list of perspective questions in his phone. In the grand scheme of my life, how important is this really? What would my wisest self do in this situation? What would someone I deeply respect do here? How do I want to feel about how I handled this? A year from now, what response would I be proud of? These questions elevated his thinking above the reactive anger to his higher values and long-term perspective. The accountability partner. She enlisted a trusted friend to be her anger accountability partner. When she was spiraling into anger, she would text her friend, who would help her see the situation more clearly. Having someone outside the situation provide perspective was invaluable. Her friend could ask the questions she couldn't ask herself in the moment. The acceptance practice. When something happened that triggered anger, he would practice radical acceptance. This is happening. This is real. I don't have to like it, but I accept that it's real. Fighting against reality was exhausting and futile. Acceptance didn't mean approval. It meant acknowledging what is, so he could respond skillfully instead of reactively. The boundary communication. She learned to express boundaries clearly, without anger. I'm not okay with being spoken to that way. I need you to speak respectfully, or I'll end this conversation. Clear, calm, firm. No yelling. No blame. Just a clear statement of her boundary and the consequence if it's crossed. People actually respected her boundaries more when they were stated calmly than when they were enforced with anger. These aren't just strategies. They're practices. They require repetition. You won't be perfect at them. You'll forget to use them sometimes. You'll try them and they won't work immediately. But if you keep practicing, they become more automatic. The neural pathways strengthen, the old patterns weaken, and gradually, you transform from someone controlled by anger to someone who has mastery over it. Chapter 9. The philosophy of non-attachment. There's a deeper reason we get angry that we haven't fully explored yet. Attachment. We get angry when reality doesn't match our attachments, our expectations, our desires, our beliefs about how things should be. He was deeply attached to the idea that people should be punctual. When someone was late, he became furious. Not just mildly annoyed, furious. Why? Because his attachment to punctuality was being violated. But punctuality is just a cultural value, a personal preference. It's not a law of the universe. His anger was him trying to make reality conform to his attachment. Buddhist philosophy teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. Not attachment in the sense of love or caring, but attachment in the sense of clinging, demanding, insisting that reality be a certain way. When you're attached to an outcome and it doesn't happen, you suffer. When you are attached to people behaving a certain way and they don't, you suffer. When you are attached to things remaining the same and they change, you suffer. She was attached to her adult children living nearby, visiting often, including her in their lives in specific ways. When they moved away and got busy with their own lives, she felt angry and hurt. Her attachment to how she thought things should be was creating her suffering. Her children were just living their lives. Her expectations were creating the problem, not their behavior. When she learned to release the attachment to love them, without demanding they live their lives according to her preferences, the anger dissolved. She could enjoy whatever connection they did have, instead of resenting what they didn't provide. This is the paradox of attachment. The tighter you grip, the more you suffer. The more you can hold things loosely, with open hands, the more peace you experience. He was attached to his career, progressing in a certain way, at a certain pace. When he got passed over for a promotion, his attachment created intense anger. At his boss, at the person who got the promotion, at himself, at the entire system. But the attachment was the problem. not the circumstances. Careers don't progress in straight lines. Disappointments happen. Life doesn't conform to our plans. When he released the attachment to his career, looking a certain way, and opened himself to whatever path unfolded, he stopped fighting reality. The disappointment was still there, but without the layer of anger that attachment created. This doesn't mean you stop caring or stop having goals. It means you hold your goals lightly, you pursue them fully, but you don't make your peace contingent on achieving them exactly as you imagine. The Bhagavad Gita expresses this beautifully. You have a right to perform your prescribed duties, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. Do your best. Make the effort. But don't be attached to specific outcomes, because outcomes are not fully within your control, and attachment to them will create suffering. She applied this to parenting. She had specific ideas about what kind of adults her children should become. College educated, professional, traditional. When her son dropped out of college to become a musician, her attachment to her vision created anger and conflict. When she released the attachment and accepted him as he was, choosing his own path, the relationship healed. She could support him in his actual journey instead of resenting him for not following her imagined one. Attachment also shows up in our relationships. We're attached to people being a certain way, loving us in certain ways, meeting our needs in specific ways. When they inevitably fail to match our attachments, because they're human with their own needs and limitations, we get angry. He was attached to his wife expressing love through verbal affirmation. That's how he felt loved. But her love language was acts of service. She showed love by doing things for him. His attachment to receiving love, his way created constant frustration and anger. She never tells me she loves me. Actually, she did, constantly. Just not in the language he was demanding. When he released the attachment to love, looking a certain way, and learned to recognize love in the forms she naturally expressed it, his anger transformed into gratitude. The key to releasing attachment isn't indifference. It's flexibility. It's being willing to accept that reality might look different than you imagined, and being okay with that. She had a practice she called preference without attachment. She could prefer things to go a certain way, prefer people to behave a certain way, prefer outcomes to look a certain way. But if they didn't, she practiced acceptance rather than resistance. I prefer. He call when he says he will, but if he doesn't, I'll survive and address it calmly. I prefer this project succeeds, but if it doesn't, I'll learn from it and move forward. I prefer she understand my point, but if she doesn't, I'll accept our difference. Preference without attachment. This is the middle way between not caring at all and being rigidly attached. One of the deepest attachments that creates anger is attachment to being right. He noticed he would get furious during arguments, not primarily because of the topic, but because his ego was attached to being right. Losing an argument felt like losing himself. When he could hold his opinions lightly, be open to being wrong, let others be right sometimes. Even when he thought they weren't, the anger dissipated. Being right wasn't as important as he'd thought. Connection, peace, and understanding were far more valuable than winning arguments. She had the same realization. She was so attached to being seen as competent that any criticism felt like an attack. Her defensive anger was protecting her ego, not addressing the actual feedback. When she released the attachment to being perfect and competent all the time, criticism became useful information instead of a threat. She could hear it, consider it, use what was valuable, and discard what wasn't, all without anger. Attachment to control is another major source of anger. We want to control what happens, how people behave, how situations unfold. When we can't, which is most of the time, we get angry. He tried to control his adult daughter's choices, who she dated, what career she pursued, how she spent her money. His inability to control her created constant anger and conflict. When he finally accepted that he couldn't and shouldn't control her, that she was an autonomous adult with her own life to live, the anger ended. He could offer advice when asked, but he wasn't invested in her following it. She was free, and paradoxically, that freedom allowed their relationship to flourish. The truth is, we control very little. We don't control other people. We don't control most circumstances. We don't even control many of our own thoughts and feelings. The more attached we are to control, the more angry we'll be, because reality will constantly remind us that we're not in control. But here's what we can control: our effort, our choices, our responses, our inner state. When we focus our energy there, instead of trying to control the uncontrollable, we experience far less anger. She worked in a field where many things were outside her control: market conditions, client decisions, team dynamics, weather, regulations. For years, she raged against these uncontrollables, as if her anger could somehow change them. It couldn't, and didn't. When she shifted to focusing only on what she could control, her preparation, her communication, her attitude, her responses, her stress and anger plummeted. She became more effective precisely because she stopped wasting energy on what she couldn't control. This brings us to another crucial form of attachment: attachment to fairness. The world isn't fair. It never has been. It never will be. Expecting it to be fair is like expecting water not to be wet. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. He spent decades angry about unfairness. Bad things happened to good people, including him. Good things happened to bad people. Effort didn't always lead to success. Virtue didn't always get rewarded. His attachment to fairness created constant suffering. Every time life was unfair, which was often, he would rage against the injustice. But fairness is a human concept, an ideal. Reality doesn't operate according to fairness. It operates according to cause and effect, probability, randomness, and countless factors beyond anyone's control or understanding. When he released the attachment to life being fair, he found peace, not because he stopped caring about justice or working toward it, but because he stopped expecting the universe to conform to human notions of fairness. She had a similar journey with the concept of should. People should be kind. Traffic should move faster. My boss should appreciate me. My body should be healthier. Life should be easier. Every should is an attachment to reality, being different than it is. And every should isn't met creates anger. When she changed should to is, everything shifted. People are sometimes unkind. That's reality. Traffic is moving at this pace right now. That's reality. My boss appreciates me the way he does. That's reality. My body has these limitations. That's reality. Life has this level of difficulty. That's reality. From this place of accepting reality as it is, she could choose her response. But she wasn't fighting reality anymore, and that eliminated most of her anger. The practice of non-attachment doesn't mean you become passive or stop caring. It means you engage fully with life while holding outcomes loosely. You make effort while accepting that results aren't guaranteed. You love deeply while accepting that everything changes and nothing lasts forever. He thought of it like holding sand. Grip it tightly, and it slips through your fingers. Hold it gently in an open palm and it stays. Attachment is the tight grip that loses what it's trying to hold. The non-attachment is the open palm that allows things to be as they are. This philosophy transformed his relationship with anger because it addressed the root cause, the conflict between his attachments and reality. When your attachments align with reality, you don't suffer. But reality is constantly changing, constantly unpredictable, constantly beyond your control. So, if your peace depends on reality matching your attachments, you'll suffer constantly. But if you can release attachment while still fully engaging with life, you can be at peace regardless of circumstances. You can still prefer certain outcomes, work toward certain goals, and have certain values. But your peace isn't held hostage by whether reality conforms. This is ultimate freedom from anger. Not controlling external circumstances, but releasing the attachments that make external circumstances control you. Chapter 10. Anger and communication. Let's talk about one of the most common contexts for anger: interpersonal conflict. Because even with all the internal work, you still live in a world with other people, and sometimes you need to address issues with them. The key question is, Can you communicate your needs, concerns, and boundaries without anger? She used to think anger made her communication more effective. It showed people she was serious. It got their attention. It made them take her seriously. But when she honestly assessed the results, she saw that anger usually made communication less effective. People became defensive. They stopped listening. They focused on her tone instead of her message. Conflicts escalated instead of resolved. When she learned to communicate clearly and firmly without anger, people actually heard her. They responded more cooperatively. Issues got resolved faster and with less damage to relationships. The formula she learned was, when specific behavior, I feel emotion, because, impact need, I need, would like, specific request. No blame, no attack, no judgment, just facts, feelings, impact, and request. When you're late to meetings, I feel frustrated because it disrupts our schedule and suggests my time isn't valued. I need you to either be on time or let me know in advance if you'll be late. Compare that to the angry version. You're always late. You're so inconsiderate. You have no respect for anyone's time. Which version is more likely to create positive change? Which version attacks the person versus addresses the behavior? Which version invites cooperation versus creates defensiveness? He learned this lesson painfully through years of angry communication that damaged his relationships. When his son got a bad grade, the angry communication was, "You're lazy. You don't care about your future. You're wasting your potential." This made his son shut down, feel attacked, and become defensive. No productive conversation happened. The anger created distance and resentment. The non-angry version, I noticed you got a D in math. I'm concerned because math is important for your goals. What happened? What support do you need? This opened a conversation. His son explained he was struggling with the concepts and was too embarrassed to ask for help. They arranged for tutoring. The problem got solved because there was no anger to navigate around. This doesn't mean you can't be firm or direct. You can be crystal clear about expectations and consequences without anger. She had to address repeated lateness with an employee. She didn't yell or shame. She clearly stated, "Being on time is a requirement of this position. This is the third time this month you've been late. If it happens again, we'll need to implement a written warning and ultimately termination if it continues. Do you understand?" Firm, clear, consequences spelled out. No anger needed. In fact, the absence of anger made the message more powerful, not less. The employee knew she was serious, but didn't feel attacked. She corrected the behavior. There's a technique called I statements versus you statements that's incredibly powerful for reducing anger in communication. You statements create defensiveness. You never listen to me. You always do this. You make me so angry. I statements express your experience without attack. I feel unheard when I'm talking, and you're looking at your phone. I notice this pattern happening again. I'm feeling angry and need to take a break. He practiced replacing every you with I in difficult conversations. It completely changed the dynamics. Instead of "you're being unreasonable," he would say, "I'm having a hard time understanding your perspective. Can you help me see it?" Instead of "you never consider my feelings," he would say, "I feel hurt when my feelings aren't acknowledged. That's important to me." The shift from accusation to expression of personal experience makes all the difference. Another crucial skill is separating observation from interpretation. She would say, "You're trying to control me." That's an interpretation, likely to create conflict. What if she said instead, "You've made several suggestions about how I should handle this situation, and I'm feeling like my autonomy isn't being respected. I need to make my own decisions here." The first version is mind reading and accusation. The second version states what actually happened. Suggestions were made, and expresses her experience and need, much more likely to be heard and respected. Observations are facts that everyone can agree on. Interpretations are your stories about those facts. Anger usually comes from interpretations, not observations. He observed, You were 30 minutes late. He interpreted. You don't respect my time. You think you're more important than me. The observation might be accurate. The interpretation might be completely wrong. But if he leads with the interpretation, the other person will defend against it, and the conversation derails. If he leads with the observation and his experience, you were 30 minutes late. I felt disrespected and annoyed. I need better communication when you're going to be late. This is grounded, factual, and focuses on the actual issue. Timing is also crucial for effective communication without anger. She learned not to try to address issues when she was in the heat of anger. Nothing productive happens in that state. She would say, I'm too upset to talk about this productively right now. I've some time. Can we talk about it tonight tomorrow? This prevented countless explosive fights. By the time they talked, she could express herself clearly instead of just venting anger. He applied the same principle with email. He learned to write the angry email, but not send it. Save as draft. Come back the next day. Often he would delete it entirely or rewrite something completely different. The delay didn't mean he didn't address issues. It meant he addressed them from a calm, clear state instead of a reactive, angry one. Active listening is another crucial skill that reduces anger in communication. When someone is expressing something difficult, most people don't actually listen. They're thinking about their defense, their counter-argument, their own perspective. This creates cycles of anger and escalation. She learned to truly listen before responding, to summarize what she heard. So, you're saying that when I did X, you felt Y, because Z. Did I get that right? This simple act of truly hearing and reflecting back what the other person said often diffused their anger. People just want to be heard. When they feel heard, they're much more open to hearing your perspective. He discovered that most conflicts aren't actually about different positions. They're about different needs, not being heard or understood. His wife wanted to spend holidays with her family. He wanted to spend them with his family. For years they fought about this, with both getting angry. Then he learned to identify the underlying needs. She needed connection with her family, especially her aging parents. He needed his family traditions and the comfort of familiar celebration. When they stopped fighting about the position, whose family, and talked about the needs, connection, tradition, comfort, creative solutions emerged. Alternating years, doing separate holidays, creating new traditions that honored both needs. The anger dissolved when the needs were acknowledged and addressed. But as long as they stayed at the level of positions and arguments, anger persisted. There's also the skill of repairing after anger has happened. Even with all the skills and practices, sometimes you'll still react with anger. You're human. It happens. What matters is what you do next. She learned the components of a good repair. 1. Acknowledge what happened. I got angry and yelled at you. 2. Take responsibility. That was my choice, and my responsibility, not your fault. 3. Express genuine remorse. I'm sorry. That wasn't okay. 4. Identify what you'll do differently. Next time I feel that way, I'll take a break before responding. 5. Make amends if needed. Is there anything I can do to repair this? No justifications. No but. You. No defending the anger. Just clean ownership. And repair. He found that genuine repair often strengthened relationships rather than damaging them. It showed that he was committed to growth, that he valued the relationship, that he could admit mistakes. Relationships don't require perfection. They require responsibility and repair when you fall short of your values. Another powerful communication tool is the time out and repair protocol. They agreed that either of them could call a timeout during a heated discussion by making a T with their hands. The rules were: 1. Immediate pause. No questions or arguments. 2. Minimum 20 minutes separation. Long CQ enough for nervous system to calm. 3. Return for repair conversation within 24 hours. 4. If more time needed, communicate that clearly. This prevented destructive escalations. It gave both people a way to stop the conflict train before it crashed. And it included the repair component, so issues got addressed rather than avoided. She also learned the power of vulnerability in reducing conflict and anger. Instead of angry accusation, "You don't care about me anymore." Vulnerable expression. "I'm feeling disconnected from you, and it scares me. I miss feeling close to you." Vulnerability underneath anger is almost always more powerful and effective than the anger itself. When he learned to express the fear, hurt, or need underneath his anger, his communication transformed. His teenage daughter responded to "I worry about you when you don't text me back. I need to know you're safe," much better than she ever responded to angry demands. Vulnerability builds connection. Anger creates distance. If you want to actually resolve conflicts and strengthen relationships, vulnerability is usually more effective than anger. But vulnerability requires courage. It requires dropping your defenses and armor. It requires admitting you're hurt or scared, or need something. Anger is easier. Anger is armor. But anger doesn't get you what you really want, which is usually connection, understanding, and resolution. Finally, there's the crucial skill of knowing when to walk away. Not all conflicts are worth engaging. Not all people will respond well, no matter how skillfully you communicate. Sometimes the wisest choice is to disengage. She learned to ask herself, "Is this worth my peace? Is this person capable of and willing to have a productive conversation? Will addressing this make things better or worse?" Sometimes the answer was, walk away. Let it go. Protect your peace. This isn't avoidance of necessary conflicts. It's discernment about which battles are worth fighting and which are just opportunities to be pulled into someone else's drama. He had a colleague who seemed to thrive on conflict and anger. Every interaction was contentious. He tried every communication skill he knew. Nothing worked. Finally, he accepted, this person isn't going to change. I can't have a productive conversation with them. My only option is to minimize contact and not let their dysfunction pull me into anger. It wasn't giving up. It was wisdom. You can't communicate effectively with someone who isn't interested in communication, only in being right or creating drama. Knowing when to walk away, when to let go, when to accept that some people or situations aren't worth your energy, that's a crucial part of managing anger. The goal isn't to become a perfect communicator who never experiences anger. The goal is to become skilled enough that your communication usually resolves conflicts rather than escalates them, and wise enough to know when communication isn't the thas. Chapter 11. The spiritual dimension. There's a dimension of anger we haven't fully explored, the spiritual perspective. Regardless of your beliefs, there's profound wisdom in how spiritual traditions across cultures have approached anger. In Buddhist psychology, anger is called one of the three poisons, along with greed and delusion. It's considered one of the fundamental sources of suffering that must be transformed for awakening to occur. She wasn't Buddhist, but when she learned this teaching, it resonated deeply. Anger had been poison in her life. It poisoned her relationships, her peace, her health, her happiness. The metaphor was apt. The Buddhist approach to anger isn't suppression or denial. It's transformation through understanding. When you deeply understand the causes and nature of anger, it loses its grip on you. The Buddha taught that anger is like picking up a hot coal to throw at someone else. You're the one who gets burned. This isn't a moral judgment. It's a practical observation. Anger hurts you more than anyone else. He reflected on this teaching and realized its truth in his own life. Every time he held on to anger, he was the one suffering. He was the one unable to sleep, unable to enjoy his day, unable to be present with people he loved, the people he was angry at. Often they didn't even know, didn't care, or had moved on with their lives. He was torturing himself while they went about their business. Christianity has its own powerful teachings on anger. Jesus taught, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, turn the other cheek, forgive 70 times 7. These aren't teachings about being a doormat. They're teachings about liberation. When you can truly love your enemies, when you can genuinely forgive, You're no longer controlled by anger or hatred. You're free. She grew up Christian, but had always struggled with these teachings. How could you love someone who hurt you? How could you forgive the unforgivable? Then she realized she was misunderstanding. Loving your enemies doesn't mean liking them or accepting their behavior. It means recognizing their humanity, wishing for their healing, refusing to let hatred poison your own heart. Forgiveness doesn't mean what they did was okay. It means you release the anger that's harming you. It's not a gift to them. It's a gift to yourself. He had been carrying anger at his father for decades. His father had been abusive, absent, deeply flawed. The anger felt justified. His father deserved his anger. But that anger was destroying him. Not his father. His father was dead, beyond the reach of his anger. The only person the anger was harming was himself. When he finally forgave his father, not excusing the behavior, not saying it was okay, but releasing the anger and resentment, he felt like he'd put down a massive weight he'd been carrying for his entire adult life. The forgiveness wasn't for his father. It was for him. It was choosing his own freedom over righteous anger. Islam has profound teachings on anger as well. The Prophet Muhammad said, "The strong person is not the one who can wrestle someone else down. The strong person is the one who can control himself when he is angry." True strength isn't physical. It's not domination or force. It's self-control, especially in the face of provocation. She loved this definition of strength because it completely flipped her previous understanding. She'd thought anger made her strong, made people respect her, showed she wouldn't be pushed around. But actually, the ability to remain calm when everything in you wants to explode, that's real strength. That's the strength worth cultivating. Stoic philosophy, while not religious, has deeply spiritual insights about anger. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much more harmful are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" This one sentence captures profound wisdom. Whatever caused your anger, the insult, the injustice, the frustration, probably caused limited harm. But your anger in response, that causes unlimited harm to your relationships, your health, your peace, your judgment. The cause of anger is usually small and temporary. The consequences of anger can be enormous and long-lasting. He used this insight to evaluate whether anger was worth it in any given situation. Yes, that person was rude. But the rudeness lasted 30 seconds. If he gets angry about it, he'll suffer hours or days. Which is worse, the original rudeness or his anger about it? Obviously his anger. So why choose it? In Hindu philosophy, there's the concept of witness consciousness. The ability to observe your own mind and emotions without being identified with them or controlled by them. You're not your anger. You're the awareness that observes the anger arising and passing. When you realize this deeply, anger loses its power because you're no longer identified with it. She practiced this through meditation. Instead of "I am angry," she would observe, anger is present. There is anger in this experience. This subtle shift created enormous space. She wasn't anger. She was the space in which anger sometimes appeared. And from that place of witness consciousness, she could choose how to respond to the anger, rather than be driven by it. Taoism teaches the concept of wu wei, effortless action, non-forcing, flowing with reality rather than against it. Anger is always a form of forcing, of pushing against what is. The Tao Te Ching says, "The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and yielding will overcome." Water doesn't fight against obstacles. It flows around them. Yet over time, water carves canyons through solid rock. This is the power of non-resistance. You learn to approach conflicts like water. Not fighting, not forcing, not meeting hardness with hardness. Instead, yielding, flowing, finding the path of least resistance while still moving toward his goals. This approach dissolved so much anger because he wasn't constantly fighting anymore. He was working with reality rather than against it. Indigenous spiritual traditions often understand anger as disconnection from community, from nature, from spirit, from oneself. Healing anger requires restoring these connections. When you feel connected to something larger than yourself, when you feel part of the web of life, when you experience spiritual connection, anger becomes much less appealing and less frequent. She found this to be true. When she spent time in nature, when she felt connected to her community, when she engaged in spiritual practices that gave her a sense of meaning and purpose, anger had much less power over her. But when she was isolated, disconnected, living in her head rather than her heart, anger flourished. Connection is anger's antidote. Disconnection is its breeding ground. There's also the spiritual practice of prayer or meditation on difficult people. Instead of cursing them, attacking them, or stewing in resentment, you intentionally wish them well. You pray for their happiness, their healing, their awakening. He started doing this with people who angered him. It felt ridiculous at first. Pray for that jerk who cut me off. Wish well for that boss who's making my life miserable. But something remarkable happened. The practice dissolved his anger. When you're genuinely wishing someone well, you can't simultaneously be angry at them. The two states are incompatible, and over time his heart softened. He began to see these difficult people with more compassion. He recognized their suffering. He understood they were doing the best they could with their current level of awareness. This didn't mean accepting harmful behavior, but it meant responding to it without the poison of anger in his own heart. Many spiritual traditions also teach that anger toward others is often misdirected anger at yourself or at life itself. She discovered this in therapy. Her anger at her husband for being emotionally unavailable was actually anger at herself for choosing an emotionally unavailable partner and staying for so many years. Her anger at her mother for being critical was actually anger at herself for still seeking her mother's approval at age 45. When she took responsibility for her own choices and patterns, much of the anger at others dissolved. She could address the real issues instead of projecting them outward. There's a spiritual principle called as within, so without. The world you experience is largely a reflection of your inner state. When you're at peace within, you see a more peaceful world. When you're angry within, you see an angry world. He tested this on days when he did his spiritual practices, meditation, prayer, gratitude. He noticed fewer things triggered him. The world seemed kinder. People seemed more considerate. On days when he skipped his practices, everything annoyed him. The world seemed hostile. People seemed thoughtless. Same world, same people, different internal state creating different external experience. This taught him that managing anger isn't just about techniques for dealing with external triggers. It's about cultivating an internal state that doesn't generate anger as frequently. The spiritual dimension also includes the question of purpose and meaning. When you have a sense of purpose larger than yourself, when you feel your life has meaning and direction, petty frustrations become just that. Petty. They don't matter enough to waste energy on anger. She found that when she was engaged in meaningful work, contributing to something she cared about, connected to her values and purpose, anger rarely troubled her. But when she was just going through the motions, living on autopilot without deeper meaning, every little thing would set her off. Purpose gives perspective. It helps you see what actually matters and what doesn't. And most of what triggers anger doesn't actually matter in the context of a meaningful life. Finally, many spiritual traditions teach about karma, or the law of cause and effect. What you put out returns to you. If you sow anger, you reap conflict and suffering. If you sow peace and kindness, you reap better relationships and greater happiness. This isn't mystical, it's practical psychology. Angry people create angry environments. Peaceful people create peaceful environments. He decided to test this. For 1 month, he committed to responding to everyone and everything with patience and kindness, regardless of how they treated him. The results were stunning. His relationships improved, conflicts decreased, people responded to him more positively. His own stress and anger dropped dramatically. He realized he'd been creating the very problems he was angry about. His anger provoked defensive and negative responses from others, which gave him more to be angry about. A vicious cycle. When he broke the cycle by choosing peace regardless of circumstances, everything shifted. This is the spiritual wisdom. You have far more power over your experience than you realize. Not power over external circumstances, but power over your internal state and how you show up in the world. And when you show up with peace instead of anger, you create peace around you. Chapter 12. Living Free. We've covered a lot of ground. Understanding, practices, strategies, philosophy, spirituality. But how does all this come together in actual daily life? What does it look like to be a person who is truly free from anger's control? She wondered this herself. After years of working on her anger, practicing the techniques, studying the philosophy, what had actually changed? The answer surprised her. Everything and nothing. She still felt anger sometimes. She wasn't a robot or a saint. Things still frustrated her. People still did things that bothered her. Life still contained difficulties and injustices. But her relationship with anger was completely different. Instead of being swept away by it, controlled by it, she could observe it arising, understand where it was coming from, and choose her response. The anger was briefer, less intense, less frequent. And when it did arise, it didn't run her life. This is what freedom from anger actually looks like. Not the absence of anger, but the absence of being controlled by anger. He described it as moving from being a slave to anger to being its master. The anger still sometimes appeared as a guest, but he was the one deciding whether to listen to it, act on it, or show it to the door. The transformation wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment where everything changed. It was gradual. Through consistent practice, repeatedly choosing differently, slowly rewiring his brain and patterns. But the cumulative effect was profound. He looked at his life now, compared to 5 years ago, and barely recognized himself. The man who used to explode at minor frustrations, who drove aggressively, who fought constantly with family, who was bitter and resentful. That man was gone. In his place was someone calmer, happier, more connected, more effective, more at peace. Not because his circumstances were easier, but because he responded to them differently. This is the promise of this work. Not an easier life, but a better experience of whatever life brings. She noticed specific changes in her daily life. She could drive in traffic without getting angry. Traffic was just traffic. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Her anger didn't change it, so why waste the energy? She could receive criticism without defensive anger. Criticism was information, sometimes useful, sometimes not. She could evaluate it calmly. Instead of feeling attacked, she could set boundaries without anger. She could say no clearly and firmly without aggression or guilt. She could disagree without fighting. She could hold her position while respecting others' positions, without needing to prove she was right. She could let things go. So many things that used to occupy her mind for hours or days, she now released within minutes or seconds. Not worth it. Moving on, she could apologize when she was wrong. Her ego wasn't so fragile that admitting mistakes felt like death. She could forgive more easily. She understood that holding grudges only hurt her. And she chose not to poison herself with resentment. These weren't skills she had to think about consciously anymore. They'd become automatic through practice. New neural pathways were now the default routes her brain traveled. He noticed changes in his relationships. His marriage improved dramatically. With less anger and defensiveness, he and his wife could actually communicate. They could resolve conflicts instead of escalating them. They felt closer and more connected than they had in years. His relationship with his children transformed. His kids weren't afraid of his reactions anymore. They came to him with problems instead of hiding them. They knew he would respond with calmness and support instead of anger and judgment. His friendships deepened. People felt safe with him. They opened up to him. They sought his perspective because they knew he could remain calm and objective, even when discussing difficult topics. His professional relationships improved. Colleagues respected him. He was seen as mature and level-headed. He was given more responsibility because he could handle pressure without losing his cool. All because he learned to manage anger. Not suppress it. Not deny it, but truly master it. The physical changes were significant too. Her blood pressure normalized. The chronic tension headaches stopped. Her digestion improved. She slept better. Her immune system strengthened. All the physical toll that years of chronic anger had taken began to reverse as she found peace. His doctor commented on how much healthier he looked. His face wasn't as tense. His body wasn't as rigid. The stress that had been aging him prematurely began to ease. This isn't surprising. The research is clear. Reducing chronic anger and stress improves virtually every health metric. The body can heal when it's not constantly flooded with stress hormones. But beyond the practical benefits, there was something even more valuable: freedom. She felt free in a way she never had before. Free from the tyranny of her reactions. Free from being a victim of circumstances. Free from being controlled by other people's behavior. Free from the prison of resentment and bitterness. This freedom was worth more than anything else she'd gained. Because with freedom came joy, peace, and the ability to actually enjoy her life instead of being in constant conflict with it. He experienced the same liberation. He'd spent so much of his life in anger, and he hadn't realized how much energy it consumed. Now that energy was available for creativity, connection, growth, contribution. He felt lighter, more alive, more himself. The anger had been a heavy coat he'd been wearing his whole life. Taking it off revealed who he really was underneath. But the journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks, days when old patterns reasserted themselves. Situations that triggered him despite all his practice. Moments when he reacted with anger before he could catch himself. This is normal. Expected. Part of the process. The key was not judging yourself for the setbacks, but learning from them and continuing forward. She learned to be compassionate with herself during setbacks. I reacted with anger today. That's human. What can I learn from this? How can I handle it differently next time? No shame. No harsh judgment. Just curiosity and commitment to keep practicing. This self-compassion accelerated her progress. Because shame and self-judgment just create more anger. Anger at yourself. But self-compassion creates the conditions for real change. He also learned that managing anger was an ongoing practice, not a destination. He would need to continue doing the work. The meditation, the self-inquiry, the mindfulness, the refrains for the rest of his life. But this didn't feel like a burden. It felt like taking care of himself, like brushing his teeth, or exercising. Just part of maintaining his well-being. And honestly, the practices themselves were enriching his life. Meditation gave him peace. Mindfulness made him more present. Self-inquiry led to self-knowledge. The practices weren't just preventing anger. They were creating a better quality of life overall. She also found that as she changed, it affected the people around her. Her calmness created calm in others. Her peace invited peace. Her non-reactivity gave others space to be different too. Her husband started managing his anger better, just from observing her. Her children learned better emotional regulation by example. Her friends felt safer and more open in her presence. This is the ripple effect. Your transformation doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone you interact with. By healing your anger, you contribute to healing anger in the world around you. So, what would she tell her younger self? The version of her that was controlled by anger, suffering from it, trapped in reactive patterns. It gets better. It takes work, but it gets better. You're not broken. You're just untrained. These are skills you can learn. Patterns you can change. You don't have to live like this. Freedom is possible. Peace is possible. It's worth the effort. Start today. And what advice would he give someone just beginning this journey? Be patient with yourself. This is reprogramming decades of conditioning. It takes time. Celebrate small victories. Notice progress. Don't expect perfection. Just keep practicing. Keep choosing differently. Keep learning. One day you'll look back and realize how far you've come. The ultimate truth. They both discovered anger is optional, and life is so much better without it controlling you. Not easier necessarily, but better, richer, more peaceful, more connected, more free. And freedom, true freedom, to choose your response to life. That's what this whole journey is about. Conclusion. The invitation. We've reached the end of this exploration. But really, we're at the beginning. Because reading about anger and understanding anger intellectually is just the first step. The real work is applying these insights and practices in your actual life. Every moment is an opportunity. Every time you feel anger arising, you have a choice. You can follow the old familiar pattern, react, explode, regret, or you can choose something different. You can pause, breathe, observe, question your thoughts, access compassion, respond instead of react. At first, you'll mostly remember after you've already reacted. That's okay. Learning means you'll eventually remember during the reaction. Then you'll remember before the reaction. Then the new response will become automatic. This is how change happens. Not all at once, but through repeated choices that gradually become new patterns. The man who inspired this book, who went from being controlled by anger to being free from it, wants you to know, if he could do it, you can do it. He wasn't special. He didn't have superpowers. He was just someone who got tired of suffering and decided to change. You can make the same decision. Right now. Today. This moment. The woman whose story wove through these chapters wants you to know. The freedom is worth every bit of effort. The peace on the other side of anger is real. The improved relationships, the better health, the greater happiness, all of it is available to you. But only if you're willing to do the work. What is that work? Review what we've covered. Understanding that anger is a choice, not an inevitability. Learning to identify the thoughts that create anger. Questioning those thoughts. Reframing your interpretations. Identifying and communicating your underlying needs. Releasing attachments to how things should be. Accepting reality as it is. Practicing presence and mindfulness. Cultivating compassion for yourself and others. Developing practical strategies for real-life situations. Communicating clearly without anger. Exploring the spiritual dimensions of peace. All of this is available to you. All of this works, not because it's theory, but because countless people have applied it and transformed their lives. The invitation is simple. Join them. Decide today that you will no longer be controlled by anger. Decide that you will learn to respond to life with wisdom instead of rage. Decide that you will do the work to take your patterns. It won't be easy. Old patterns have momentum. Your brain has well-worn neural pathways. Your environment might not support your change. You'll face resistance, both internal and external. But you can do hard things. You can persist. You can practice. You can change. And on the other side of that change is the life you actually want. A life of peace instead of constant conflict. Connection instead of isolation. Freedom instead of being controlled by your reactions. A life where someone can cut you off in traffic and you just let it go. Where you can receive criticism without defensiveness. Where you can have a difficult conversation without it becoming a fight. Where you can set boundaries with calm firmness. Where you can forgive and move forward. Where you can be at peace regardless of circumstances. That life is waiting for you. It's not some distant future possibility. It's available now, through your choices, through your practice, through your commitment. The question is, will you accept the invitation? Will you decide that enough is enough? That you're tired of anger ruining your relationships, damaging your health, stealing your peace? Will you commit to doing something different? To learning new skills? To questioning old patterns? To choosing peace even when anger feels justified? The path is clear. The methods work. The support is available. All that's missing is your decision. He sat in his car, hands loose on the steering wheel. Someone cut him off. He noticed the thought arising. That driver is inconsiderate. He noticed the sensation in his body. A flash heat. And then, he let it go. He took a breath. He loosened his grip. He turned up the music slightly, and he moved forward in peace. No anger, no reaction, no suffering. Just a brief moment that passed like a wave. leaving him undisturbed. This is the promise fulfilled. This is freedom. This is possible for you. It starts with one choice, then another, until one day, you realize you're not the same person you used to be. You're calmer, happier, more connected, more free, more yourself. That person is waiting to emerge. That life is waiting to be lived. The only question is, when will you begin? Not someday. Not when circumstances are easier. Not when other people change. Now. Today. This moment. Because now is the only time you have. And this moment is the only moment that matters. What if you decided right now, I will no longer be controlled by anger. I will do whatever it takes to transform this pattern. I will practice. I will persist. I will change. What if you made that decision and committed to it fully? Your life would never be the same. You would look back a year from now, 5 years from now, and barely recognize the person you used to be. The person who was controlled by anger. The person who reacted instead of responded. The person who suffered unnecessarily because they didn't know there was another way. That person is already fading. The new person is emerging. The person who is calm in the storm, peaceful in chaos, unshaken by provocation, free from the prison of anger. That person is you, your true self. Underneath the conditioning and patterns, waiting to be revealed. All it takes is the decision to begin and the commitment to continue. So, let's end where we began. What if anger is just a choice you keep making? Now you know it is. And now you know you can make a different choice. Every moment, every day, every situation. You can choose peace. You can choose calm. You can choose freedom. The choice is yours. It always has been. You just didn't know it. Now, you do. What will you choose? Thank you for taking this journey. May you find the peace and freedom you seek. May you transform your relationship with anger. May you live the life that's waiting for you on the other side of this change. Remember, you are not your anger. You are the witness of it. You are the chooser of your response. You are free. Now go live that truth.